Hello and welcome to another episode of the new Northumberland Coast series. I'm going to be looking at Cresswell today, but before we begin the story of Cresswell, I wanted to include this section of coast between Newbiggin to the south here and Cresswell just to the north of here. The area between Newbiggin and Cresswell is known as Line Beach. A small stream known as Line Burn makes its estuary here, and just a short distance inland is the mining village of Linemouth. The village was properly established when the mine opened in 1927 and was one of the largest in England, providing employment not only to the residents of Linemouth but also many of the surrounding towns. In 1974, Alcan UK built an aluminium smelter here, as we saw the raw alumina was being brought in by sea to Camas, and then it was transported from Camas to here by train. An exclusive power station was built to power the smelter, as aluminium needs to be smelted using electric power and supplied with coal by the adjacent Linemouth colliery. In 1994, however, an enormous underground fire broke out, and the only way to extinguish it was to close the mine completely. Alcan then had to rely on the neighbouring pits at Ellington and Woodhorn for its coal supply. Coal burning power stations don't use lumps of coal, they burn coal dust. And that coal dust has to be pure with no impurities. It's like a huge jet engine that sucks in coal dust at a ferocious rate, and that's what powers the generators. When coal is extracted from underground, it is often littered with impurities, such as stone and shale. One of the first tasks at the surface is to sort it into different quality grades and then wash all the impurities out so that it can be burned efficiently by the consumer. When the colliery was in operation here, the waste water from the coal washeries emptied straight onto the beach, making the sea and the foreshore black and dirty. My wife has the philosophy that in everything bad there is something good. In this case, the good was that the sea would filter out the waste and return clean sea coal to the high water mark for local people to collect for free. Sea coaling, as it's known, is still done to this day all along this southern part of the Northumbrian coast where the mines once were. The Alcan smelter closed in 2012 due to high operational costs, and the site was demolished in 2016. The power station remains though, and now supplies the national grid with electricity. It was bought by a Czechoslovakian company who converted it from coal to a biomass burning power station. Biomass is a combination of wood, manure and household waste, which does produce carbon emissions, but considerably less than fossil fuels. Well, here I am just a mile further north in Cresswell itself. And Cresswell featured in the second episode of my castle series of 2021, and also in the special bonus edition to that series I did last year. So in this visit I want to concentrate on the village itself rather than just the Peel Tower. If you want to know more about the Peel Tower, then please watch the bonus episode of the Northumberland Castle series. The name Cresswell comes from two Old English words, curse meaning watercress, and well referring to a stream or a water source combined to give you watercress stream. The village here is associated with the Cresswell family, who resided here from the late 1100s. The origins of that name are first recorded in Cresswell in the historic region of Renfrewshire in southwest Scotland. It's unclear if the village took its name from the family who occupied the castle here, or whether the family took their name from the Old English place name. However, evidence of settlements here at Cresswell go back much further than 1100 and as far back as prehistoric times. Thousands of flint tools have been found over the years at Lion Hill, which is close by, in support of this. As we mentioned earlier, the geological history of Britain was this seesaw climate of tropical forests followed by warm, shallow seas. The more recent forests in this region seem to have been a mix of alder and ash trees. Evidence of that can be found on the edge of the shoreline whenever the spring tides are very low. Much of Cresswell's early recorded history centres around the Peel Tower and the Hall, with the earliest written record of a settlement showing in 1191 when Robert de Cresswell and his family lived in a manor house adjacent to where the tower stands today. It is reasonable to presume that working families would have lived in the neighbourhood to work the land. In more recent times, a sperm whale was washed onto the beach here during a heavy storm in 1822. Addison Cresswell, with another landowner, Robert Atkinson, claimed it as theirs. Whales provided great wealth, so the event was seen as good fortune. Some local fishermen and some builders busy building the Cresswell Hall managed to get it ashore, and the whale ended up yielding 9 tons of whale meat and 158 gallons of whale oil. However, the Admiralty intervened and claimed it for the Crown. Fishing with the use of cobles was the main source of employment for the people of the village. Cut into the rocks are what is known as brat holes, used for keeping catches of fish, crabs and lobsters fresh until they were ready for processing, sale and the market. The word brat seems to have come from an Old Norse word meaning a large receptacle. However, brat was also the name given to turbot, one of the fish readily caught on the Northumberland coast, so the word may have had a double meaning. The site of the brat hole is at the other end of this outfall pipe, which takes surface rainwater out to sea. It is now only visible at the lowest equinoctial tides. The last time it was visible was in 2019, and the next such low tide will be the 11th of March 2024, so put that in your diary if you wish to see it. The fishing boats would have landed their catch at high tide and then used the brat hole to sort the catch of fish and crabs as the tide went out. There would be no point unloading their boats at a low tide point only to have everything washed away by the incoming tide. So the point I'm getting at means that the high water mark must have been out there at the end of that pipe, which means that it has moved significantly in 200 years from way out there to here, maybe 200 meters or more. Once again, this points to the slow sinking of the land on this east coast and therefore the sea levels rising. It is very difficult to discuss the sea on this coast and, of course, not mention the lifeboat. And Cresswell is no exception. A lifeboat had been established at Newbiggin since 1854, and it covered the area of sea right up the coast here as far as Cresswell. But in 1874, when James Brown and his 3 sons drowned following the capsize of their coble within sight of the shore, it was decided Cresswell needed its own lifeboat. The land and stone for building the lifeboat house was gifted by Addison Cresswell, and money from a legacy left after the death of Thomas Hackwood Sr., who was the owner of Hackwood and Sons Potteries, provided the first boat, which was named after him, the Old Potter. His legacy provided money for 5 lifeboats along the east coast. The boat was a typical boat of that era, powered by up to 8 oarsmen. It was replaced though in 1889 by the Ellen and Eliza, and that too was replaced in 1909 by the Martha. All 3 boats were powered by oarsmen. The decision to close the lifeboat house in 1944 was made due to a lack of men to man the boat, and also because both Newbiggin and Ambient both now had motorised boats. Today the lifeboat house serves as the village community centre. The lifeboat service is often referred to as the 4th emergency service, and anyone who's familiar with the lifeboat service knows that it all began with Grace Darling from Bamborough in 1838. However, Cresswell has its own Grace Darling. A steely, courageous woman by the name of Margaret Brown, almost certainly a relative of the Browns lost in 1874. It was during a storm on the 5th of January 1876, the Gustav, a Swedish paddle steamer, was swept onto the rocks here at Cresswell. It had 2 lifeboats aboard, but one was smashed as it collided with the rocks, and the other broke loose with 4 sailors aboard and capsized near to the shore. The women of the village, tied together with a rope, formed a human chain with Margaret at the front and managed to rescue the 4 men clinging to the upturned boat. The remaining sailors remained aboard the Gustav, stranded on the rocks, being constantly battered by the heavy waves. The old Potter was unable to launch as the sea was too rough, and the rocks would have prevented the lifeboat getting anywhere near the Gustav anyway. Exhausted from their shore rescue, Margaret then set off across the dunes to Newbiggin, 5 miles further to the south, in atrocious weather, accompanied by Mary Brown and Isabel Armstrong, to get the breech's buoy equipment housed at Newbiggin. The breech's buoy is a rope system of apparatus where a rocket is fired from the shore towards the stricken vessel. A rope is attached to the rocket, and then the sailors can secure that and be winched back to the shore. They had to wade across the Line River, swollen and raging due to the storm. Margaret and her accomplices reached Newbiggin and raised the alarm, returning to Cresswell with the equipment. By the time they got back to Cresswell, the wind had calmed slightly and the old Potter had managed to launch, safely rescuing the remaining sailors from the Gustav. Margaret was given a silver teapot in recognition of her bravery, and she was given the title of the Second Grace Darling. Now, I know you might think a silver teapot is not much of an award for such a brave act, but I can assure you in that time a solid silver teapot would have been worth an awful lot of money. Mary and Isabel both received a silver brooch for their part in the rescue. Soon afterwards, though, Cresswell had its own rocket house and breeches buoy equipment. During the Second World War, the adjacent beach just to the north at Druridge was considered to be one of the most vulnerable beaches in a would-be German invasion. Cresswell was given a radar station to help defend it. It was a chain home low radar station, a name given to the network of radar stations all around the British coast. It was the first early warning system in the world to warn of approaching aircraft as low as 500 feet. On the 8th of October 1940, during the German attempt to crush the RAF and its radar system, the Cresswell station was attacked. One high explosive bomb was dropped, but it missed its target, hitting the road nearby and injuring one person. The radar station continued to work throughout the rest of the war unharmed. The following year would put Cresswell and the Cresswell family in British and world history forever, and the honour fell to Joe Baker Cresswell. He was born in 1901 at Cresswell Hall. Once again, please refer to the Cresswell Tower video for the history of the family. And he joined the Royal Navy at the end of the First World War in 1919, aged 18 years. In 1940, he was given command of HMS Bulldog, based in Iceland, and in command of the 3rd Escort Group, protecting Atlantic convoys. On May the 9th, 1941, the 3rd Escort Group was attacked by a German submarine, numbered U-110, and the liner Athenia was sunk, the first British ship to be sunk in the Second World War. The submarine managed to sink 2 other merchant vessels, before Captain Cresswell gave the order for depth charges to be fired. The submarine was damaged and forced to surface, whereupon the crew of Cresswell's ship captured the German crew. But more importantly, a huge amount of intelligence and one Enigma cipher machine. The very same one that Alan Turing would go on to use at Bletchley Park to break the German coded messages, which of course eventually led to the Germans being defeated. For his heroic actions, Captain Joe Baker Cresswell was awarded the DSO, the Distinguished Service Order. King George VI told him personally the capture of the submarine and all the intelligence aboard it was the single most significant event in the whole war at sea. Of course, that was all a long time ago now, and today Cresswell is a sleepy seaside village nestling among the sand dunes. The Germans never managed to invade Cresswell despite its vulnerability, but every year it gets invaded by hordes of tourists, all coming to enjoy the award-winning beaches, miles of golden sand and the amazing Northumbrian weather. There are two huge holiday parks, Golden Sands and Park Dean Resorts, all offering affordable holiday cabins. Golden Sands overlooks the coast and Park Dean is more of a woodland setting on the edge of the village. There's only one shop in the village, and that is Cresswell Ices, and that is extremely popular with quite lengthy queues on most days in the summer. And if you want a meal, the Drift Cafe, which is just a little few hundred metres along the road, provides everything from a cuppa to a full sit-down meal. There are several places to park near to the dunes and shore, but like all places in Northumberland since the pandemic, parking can get difficult and becomes congested on summer days. Okay, that's all for this section. I'm going to leave you with some views, and I'm just nipping literally half a mile further north to Druridge Bay, which is our next location, and I'm going to see you there in a few moments. Well, hello again. I'm just a few hundred metres further north from our last location, and from Cresswell we then enter Druridge Bay, which is an outstanding 7-mile stretch of golden sandy beach fringed with some rugged dunes. It forms a habitat for some very important wildlife and extends from Cresswell here at the south end all the way north to Ambient. It is a natural bay with dunes formed over thousands of years from prevailing westerly winds. You would think that on an exposed eastern coast that the wind would be more dominant from the sea. It is true that the winter here does see very strong winds from the east coming off the sea, but if you look at the wind direction over the whole year, it is from the west, and these dunes prove that. To understand how, we need to look at how a dune is formed. Dunes that form in the desert regions are different to coastal dunes. Nevertheless, the principles are broadly the same. A dune is formed when sand is blown along by the wind until it reaches an obstacle and gets trapped. It then begins to pile up into a mound. Eventually, vegetation begins to grow on it, and so more sand gets trapped and the dune grows bigger. The windward side of the dune has a gentle slope, and the leeward side has a steep slope, and this is called the slip face, simply because the sand grains are blown over the peak of the dune and slip down the other side. If you look at the profile of the dunes here, you can clearly see the gentle slope is on the side facing inland to the west, and the steeper slip face is facing the sea to the east. It will be the case that easterly winter storms will reverse this direction of sand transportation periodically. But because the prevailing winds blow from the west for a longer period throughout the year, whatever sand is blown inland during an easterly gale gets blown back towards the beach and added to the dunes. A new dune is called an embryonic dune, and a mature one, that's one completely covered in vegetation, is called a grey dune, due to it being mixed with other sediments such as soil. Pretty much the only vegetation that will grow on a new dune is marram grass, which has adapted to be able to resist harsh coastal conditions. Its roots go deep into the dune, and it forms a mesh binding the sand together. Its blade-like leaves are curled in a spiral, protecting it from the salt air. The grass, of course, allows the sand to accumulate between its numerous stems, so both plant and dune help each other. This grass colonises sand dunes very quickly, allowing other plants to coexist. So you are very likely to find sea buckthorn growing alongside marram grass. As you progress further away from the shoreline, you get a more varied selection of vegetation. It is quite common to find an area of wetland not far behind a dune formation. This variation in habitat provides a fantastic haven for all kinds of wildlife, from birds to insects and many small mammals. Historically, Druridge Bay had its own industry here once, producing industrial alkali. The source of this alkali came from the rich sea kelp crop that grows on the rocks here. Kelp is one subgroup of the genus seaweed. All seaweeds provide a source of alkali, but kelp, having broad, thick leaves, yields the largest amounts. John Crawford Hodgson, who was the author of The History of Northumberland in 1899, writes that in the 1700s, the local fishermen at Cresswell and nearby Hadston collected the kelp at low tide during the summer months when the rocks were exposed. It was then carried in baskets on the back of ponies to the inland side of the dunes. The dunes would be used for drying the kelp in the sun. Then circular hollows were dug on the edge of the dunes and lined with loose stones where the kelp was fired. From this a liquid exuded which on cooling formed a heavy dark alkaline substance. After a brief refining process, it was used in the manufacture of glass and soap. Glass manufacture in both Newcastle and Sunderland was a booming industry in the 1700s, with numerous companies along the banks of the Tyne and Wear rivers. The industry came to an end in much the same way as the alum industry did in North Yorkshire, with the invention of a synthetic substitute. The synthetic alkali was invented by a Frenchman, Nicolas Leblanc, in 1789. According to Hodgson's book, the secret found its way to Newcastle in 1802, and by 1823 synthetic Leblanc soda had completely superseded plant-based sources of alkali for industrial use. Of course, kelp still provides a rich source of nutrition in food, especially today in our awakening awareness of the benefits to natural sources of food. In World War II, after the fall of France and the Netherlands in 1940, Churchill's biggest fear was that the Germans would continue across the North Sea and invade Britain. The government quickly identified many beaches on the east coast, especially here in Northumberland, as being vulnerable to attack should a German invasion take place, and Druridge was one such beach. Concrete cube-shaped blocks were lined up all along the beach with an additional ditch to hinder any attack. The following year, in 1941, anti-tank scaffolding, mines and miles of barbed wire were strewn all along the beach to strengthen the defences. Several concrete pillboxes or observation posts were dotted along the beach, hidden in the dunes. These would be armed with a Type 22 to 27 light machine gun to pick off any German soldiers running up the beach. Just 100 metres behind the dunes on Hemscott Hill is one of the pillboxes disguised as a derelict farm building. This is now a Grade 2 listed building. The flat fields behind the dunes were littered with anti-glider landing obstacles, no longer existing due to years of open cast mining. Towards the end of the war, Druridge became one of the practiced areas for the Normandy invasion and also a target range for bombers and artillery. The danger area extended well out to sea, unspent ordnance is still occasionally washed up on the beaches here. If you come here for a day visit or a holiday and you're walking along the beach and you come across something metallic and suspicious looking, I suggest you don't try and pick it up. Contact the emergency services and stay well clear. Where I've parked my car, which is just 100 metres behind the camera, I noticed a cylindrical object which was obviously once a mine, and the farmer has actually filled it with concrete and using it as a barrier to stop vehicles driving onto the dunes. In 1980, there was a proposed plan for a nuclear reactor here. However, that was thwarted by huge protests and a stroke of luck when Sizewell was deemed as a cheaper option. In the 1990s, the area was devastated by the extraction of sand from the foreshore by a company called Banks Mining. It was successfully stopped, but only when Banks were given an alternative site at nearby Highthorne for a surface coal mine instead. At the north end of the bay is Druridge Bay Country Park, which was opened in 1989 from reclaimed land when surface mining finished in that area. Ladyburn Lake, as it's known, which is obviously a man-made lake, is very popular with water sports, and the dunes and wetland around the park are extremely popular with ornithologists, and so well worth a visit. And if you like, you can even get married on the dunes here. The past 10 years has seen Druridge return to its outstanding natural beauty, and for now at least, is a very happy ending for this amazing place. Well, that's it for this particular episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and hit that bell icon so that you are informed of all my latest releases. We're going to move slightly further north, so I will see you there in the next episode very soon.